What do you guys think about that? I cannot believe that I made that from scratch. Me, a guy that has spent his entire life running from computers and technology and anything like that, and I made that. Today, we're going to talk about my all-time favorite subject. When it comes to building hot rods, engines, things like that, my all-time favorite subject, cylinder heads and intake manifolds. That's my specialty. Those two things have pretty much funded everything having to do with my car for the last 25, 30 years. Here's the thing. There's no videos out there for these original B1 cylinder heads. I've been looking and looking. There's nothing out there that says, okay, this is the cylinder head. This is what it looks like when you get it. These are the things that you have to do to it in order to run it. This is simply a video to show what I had to go through to build these heads. I dug up some old pictures I had. I didn't take too many pictures back in 2007, but I did snap a couple pictures of these heads when they came out of the box. This first picture, you can see just the intake face. You can see some writing on there where I was just doing some measurements. I was trying to figure out how much material I had below the intake valve spring seats. They're about 300 thousandths thick right there. So the plan was to raise the middle of the port about 250 thousandths, quarter of an inch. You can see how tall the intake port is. The floor of the intake port is looks like I have written down it was inch 480. So 1 inch 480 thousandths high. I think that put it about an inch higher than the factory heads. And that's really important, as I'll talk about later. When you raise the intake port like that, it really gives you a better advantage at the intake valve. It straightens out the port real nicely. Where you can see the roof of the intake port and how much material is in there. I mean, they're really, really thick, chunky heads. Then you roll the head over. This is what the raw combustion chamber looks like with the blank valve seats in it. They're just square cut blank seats. They have no angles put on them yet. You have to do all that yourself. If you turn the head around to the other side, this is what the exhaust port looks like. Again, you can just see how much material there is in there. You can see how thick the material is around the guide bosses. You'll see in these later pictures where there's so much material to remove that I actually had to remove the valve guides in order to port them to the shape that I was after. Okay, so this next picture, this is what the head looks like after rough cutting in the valve job. And that's the first thing that I did to these heads. I sent them out to the machine shop just to speed up the process. But what that did is that showed how much material was left in these bowls. And you can see by these first pictures that there's just no way to run a head like this out of the box. It definitely needs extensive hand work in order to work properly. I found this little cartoon, it's kind of funny. So in the winter of between 2017 and 2018, I went to work on these heads, and I basically made this my winter project. This is pretty much all I did for the entire winter, is work on these heads. And I say it like that because I only have so much spare time. First thing I did was start working on the bowl diameter. So I spent an enormous amount of time talking to my old buddy Tom Wolcott about what percentages to put in these heads. So the way that it works is when you're doing bowl work on a set of cylinder heads, you put a certain
number in the bowl to allow the air column to come around the valve job. And that percentage has to do with the shape of the port. And after many hours of discussion, we came up with between 90 and 91%. So here you can see you're measuring out the bowl diameter and then sneaking up on it by grinding. And it's just a long, tedious process of grinding and checking and measuring and going back and forth. This next picture is of the exhaust bowl, and you can see I'm just starting to cut the material out of it, and I had just pushed the exhaust guide out. You can see there's no exhaust guide in that picture. I pushed the exhaust guide out so that way I can get the port shape that I felt I needed. This next picture, it really shows how extensive the level of porting has to be. There's an enormous amount of material that has to come out of these things in order for them to flow properly. The next picture here, you can see the exhaust bowl semi-finished, and then the guide work was starting to get done as far as the guide boss goes, starting to take shape. Now this next picture is the intake bowl. You can see where it's starting to take shape too. The way I do this is the entire porting process starts at the valve job, and then it goes into the bowl, and then you pretty much set the depth of the bowl in relationship to the port window. So on the intake side, it's for the most part a straight shot from the top of the intake port window to the deep part of the bowl. And in this case, there was an enormous amount of material left in the roof of the intake port that needed to be removed. So here I flipped the head over, went to work. It's my favorite style cutter I was using here. It's really aggressive. I lubricate it with wax, and I basically spend hours removing material. This picture is of the head upside down. The port on the right it's got the bowl roughed in, but the roof is just barely got any work done to it. The port on the left is my pattern port. So that port right there has been raised, which because the picture's upside down, it looks like it's lowered. But you can see the difference in intake roof height between the left port and the right port. And this is just roughed in cutter work. This is nothing fancy, nothing smoothed over. So you're just spending a lot of time straightening out the roof and balancing the push rod pinch between one side to the other, finding that balance between restriction and valve exposure to the bowl. Yeah, it generated an enormous amount of material. Here you can see what that looks like. It's funny when you post pictures like this, people freak out. They're like, what in the heck? You can see all this material just flowing out of there. Made enormous piles on the porting bench. I ended up collecting all the chips that were on the bench. And my bench is small. It's only 2 foot by 4 foot. But whatever hits that bench, I always sweep it into a pile. Collect those chips just to give me a visual of how much work I put into these things. I still have that 1 gallon Ziploc bag sitting up on the shelf above my porting bench. It's the most material I've ever pulled out of a set of cylinder heads. This next picture is starting to work on the chamber. So I roll the head back over, and now it's time to roughen the chambers. Right there you can see I just have some chamber valves installed. Those are just tools to use so that you don't get into the valve job with your cutters, just to protect the valve job. This next picture is, you can see the bulwark is done, and you can just tell right there that I'm working on the angles for the combustion chamber. There's a couple of main things that I do with the chambers. What I like to feed the exhaust port, and then I like to just make sure that the intake port's nice and unshrouded. I mean, you can tell here what it looks like. I'm super happy with it. I like to finish the combustion chambers in street cars to another level. Because of the carbon deposits and all that kind of stuff, running pump gas and things, it just seems to make the engine happier if the combustion chamber is finished at a higher level. The other thing that I did is I reshaped all the guides before I put them back in the head. And I just do that on my drill press. I chuck them in the drill press, and then I go at it with a file, and I create that bullet nose. I don't like the really thin guide work on the exhaust guides. I like to keep, just because of the heat and whatnot, I like to keep that exhaust guide fairly substantial. Now, this next set of pictures, the external drains that you have to run on the head, to be honest, it's a lot of work. You're not just drilling holes in the end of heads and putting fittings in there. You gotta attack it from a systems approach. So what ends up happening is you have this rough hole on the inside of the valve cover rail, and you can tell oil's not going to want to run out of that very nicely. So then what you have to do is you have to hand finish all that. And around the valve spring seats, it's all blended down through the push rod holes. So I cut about half of the valve cover boss away, so that way the oil can pass past it to get to the drain. This next picture just shows just looking through the hole.
Man, if you made it through that, you're pretty serious about your big block Mopar cylinder heads. I know that information's kind of dry for a lot of people, and I apologize for that. And trying to tell a story with pictures instead of video, it's not quite as exciting. But I hope the point came across as far as what it takes to do a set of these. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn these upside down, lay them out on the bench, and CC the combustion chambers. I'm going to do that. I'm going to order the custom UEM pistons. United Engine Machine is right here in Carson City, Nevada, and the guys over there know their Mopars. Like, there's some hardcore Mopar guys in the engineering department at UEM. So I think what I'm going to do is share that process. I'll show you the whole process of ordering a custom piston that would actually apply for any engine. And the cool thing about from here going forward is it's all video stuff. I don't have to rely on old pictures and things. I got this camera and I can just turn it on and work. And that's a much smoother way to try and tell a story. If you could, give me some comments. Give me some comments down below. I'm curious what you thought about this, if it applies to what you're doing. If you know anybody that's running B1 stuff, give them this video. Even if they've already done their heads, it's just something to think about. If you could, hit the notification bell. I think what you do is you go to my channel page and then you hit that little bell up there. I think that's how it works. I'm just learning all this stuff. So let's roll some pictures of some finished port work. Until next time.